I was just a waitress when a billionaire slid $5 across my table like it was nothing. He thought it was a test. What he didn't expect was my answer. By the time he stood up to leave, I had unknowingly rewritten his will and changed both our lives forever. Before I begin, if you've ever felt invisible while doing honest work, if you've ever been judged by someone who never bothered to learn your name, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel. Your stories matter here too. I never imagined my life would change on a Tuesday afternoon that smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner. I was 29, wearing a faded blue apron with a loose thread at the hem, standing on my feet for the sixth hour straight. The diner sat just off the highway, the kind of place truckers stop for pie and lonely people came to avoid cooking for one. I'd been working there since my mother got sick, since hospital bills stacked higher than my hopes. It wasn't a dream job, it was survival. And that day, survival felt heavier than usual. The lunch rush had thinned, leaving behind a few scattered plates and the low hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. I was wiping down a booth when the bell above the door rang, soft but sharp enough to cut through my thoughts. I looked up out of habit, pasted on the smile I'd practiced in the mirror since I was 16, and saw him walk in. He didn't look like trouble. He didn't look like anything special either. Just a man in his early 60s, neat gray hair, pressed shirt, shoes that probably cost more than my rent, but didn't scream it. He moved slowly, like someone who was used to being waited on, not rushed. His eyes scanned the room with quiet calculation, lingering just a second too long on the people, not the menu. I grabbed a menu and approached him. "Afternoon," I said. "Sit anywhere you like." He chose the booth by the window, sunlight catching the edge of his watch. I poured him water, set down the menu, and gave him my name like I always did. "I'm Clara. I'll be taking care of you." He looked up at me then, really looked, and nodded. "Thank you, Clara." Something in the way he said it, slow, deliberate, made me pause. Most customers barely heard my name. To them, I was sweetheart, miss, hey you. But I brushed it off. People surprise you sometimes. He ordered simply. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, black coffee. No substitutions, no fuss. While the kitchen worked, I refilled his cup once, then twice. Each time his eyes followed me, not in a way that felt wrong, just observant, like he was reading between lines I didn't know I was writing. When I brought the food, he waited until I set the plate down. "You're busy," he said. "It comes and goes," I replied. "Do you like it here?" The question caught me off guard. Customers didn't usually ask that. "It pays the bills," I said carefully, the way you do when the truth feels too big. He nodded again, thoughtful. "And the people?" I thought of the regulars who tipped in coins, the ones who snapped their fingers, the kind old woman who brought me knitted socks every winter. "Most days they're fine," I said. He smiled faintly at that. "Most days," he echoed. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, like he wasn't in a hurry to be anywhere else. I checked on him once more, then left him to his meal. From the counter, I watched him pull a small notebook from his pocket and scribble something. I wondered if he was a writer, or a salesman, or just lonely. In this job, you learn not to ask. When he finished, he placed his fork neatly on the plate and folded his napkin carefully. I brought the check, slid it into the black folder, and set it on the table. "Take your time," I said. He did. He pulled out a crisp bill, $100, and placed it inside. My stomach tightened. The meal was barely $15. I smiled, already forming the thank you in my head, already calculating groceries and gas. Then he added something else. He took a $5 bill, folded it once, and placed it on top of the receipt, separate, visible. I stood there, frozen for a breath too long. In my world, tips were a language. This one spoke loudly. $5 on a $15 meal wasn't insulting on its own, but next to a $100 bill, it felt like a message.
I picked up the folder slowly. "I'll be right back with your change." "No need," he said, stopping me gently. "That's for you." I looked from the $5 bill to his face. He watched me closely now. No smile, no apology, just expectation. Something in my chest tightened. I thought of my mother, pale in a hospital bed, telling me not to let the world harden me. I thought of the extra shift I'd picked up last week when my feet were already swollen. I thought of every time I'd swallowed words to keep peace. "Sir," I said quietly, "was there a problem with the service?" He tilted his head as if considering the question. "No, the service was fine." "Then I'm confused," I admitted. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "$5 is a tip," he said. "It's appropriate." The way he said appropriate made my cheeks burn, not with anger, exactly, with something steadier. I stood there longer than I should have after he left, staring at that $5 bill like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. Eventually, I picked it up and slipped it into my apron, not because I wanted it, but because leaving it there felt like pretending the moment hadn't happened. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of refills and forced smiles, but my mind kept circling back to his eyes, the way they'd sharpened when I spoke, the strange satisfaction in his laugh when I refused him. I told myself he was just another customer, another odd interaction in a job full of them. Still, when I locked up that night and stepped into the cooling air, I felt like I'd crossed an invisible line. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, heart already racing. Mom had a follow-up appointment that afternoon, and I was trying to figure out how to leave early without losing hours. I brewed cheap coffee and stared at the wall, replaying the diner scene like it was a dream I couldn't shake. Who tests a waitress with a tip, and why did it feel like more than a game? I shrugged it off, pulled on my uniform, and headed back in. By noon, the diner was busier than usual. A tour bus had stopped, filling booths with chatter and impatience. I moved fast, balancing plates and expectations, when I saw him again. Same gray hair, same measured walk, same booth by the window. For a second, I wondered if my exhaustion was making things up. Then he looked up and nodded, like we'd planned this. I approached cautiously. "Hello again?" "Hello, Clara," he said, smiling this time. "May I sit in your section?" I almost laughed. "You already are." He ordered the same meal. As I wrote it down, I noticed his hands, steady, confident, the hands of someone who'd signed papers that changed lives. I shook the thought away. Rich or not, he was just a man eating meatloaf in a roadside diner. When he brought his food, he didn't start eating right away. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said. "I do," he insisted. "Yesterday wasn't about money, it was about character." I folded my arms loosely, listening. "You could have just asked who I am." That's the thing. People tell you who they are when they think it doesn't matter. I didn't like the way that sounded, but I stayed quiet. He continued. "I've spent my life surrounded by yes people, smiles for sale, gratitude on command. I wanted to see what happened when I offered something small from a position of power." "And?" I asked. "And you didn't take it," he said softly, not without saying something true. I felt my guard rise. "I'm not a lesson." "No," he agreed quickly, "you're a reminder." The words hung between us. I set down his coffee, hands steady despite the swirl inside me. "If that's all, I have other tables." "Of course," he said. "One more thing. What are you doing here?" I frowned. "Working?" "No," he said gently. "I mean, in life." The question landed heavier than the plates I carried. I thought of my mother, of the hospital room, of the stack of bills hidden in a drawer. "I'm taking care of family. That's enough for now." He nodded, satisfied. "It usually is." When he finished eating, he paid an exact change and left no tip at all. Strangely, it didn't sting. It felt intentional, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. I watched him leave, unsure what to make of him, unsure why my chest felt tight with something like anticipation. 3 days passed before anything else happened. On the fourth, the diner phone rang during the slow mid-afternoon lull. I answered, expecting a to-go order. Instead, a woman's voice, crisp and professional, asked for me by name. "This is Clara," I said. "Miss Reynolds," she replied. "My name is Evelyn Porter. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Harold Whitmore." The name meant nothing to me. "I'm sorry," I said. "I think you have the wrong number." "No," she said calmly. "You waited on him earlier this week." My stomach dropped. "Yes," I said slowly. "What is this about?" "She would like to meet with you," she continued, "at his office, tomorrow if possible." I laughed, a short disbelieving sound. "I'm a waitress. I don't meet customers at their offices." There was a pause. "Mr. Whitmore is prepared to compensate you for your time." There it was again, money. The test never ended, apparently. "I'm not interested," I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came. "Please," she said, a hint of urgency breaking through. "He insists." I thought of my mother's appointment, of the bills, of the look in Harold Whitmore's eyes when I spoke up. Against my better judgment, I heard myself sigh. "I can stop by after my shift for a few minutes." His office was nothing like I imagined, no towering skyscraper, no marble floors, just a quiet building downtown, all glass and light. Evelyn met me in the lobby, ushered me upstairs, and led me into a room that smelled faintly of books and polished wood. Harold stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Thank you for coming," he said, turning to face me. "I didn't come for money," I said immediately. "I know," he replied. "That's why I asked." He gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing. "Say what you need to say." He studied me for a long moment, then spoke. "I've spent my life surrounded by companies, properties, things I couldn't name if I tried. And yet I've never been sure who sees me and who sees my wallet." "That's not my problem," I said. "No," he agreed, "but you made it yours when you chose honesty over comfort." I crossed my arms. "If this is another test—" "It isn't," he said firmly. "It's a request. I'm revisiting my will." The room seemed to tilt. "That has nothing to do with me." "It does now," he said. "I want you to be part of a foundation I'm creating, one that rewards integrity in ordinary places, people who speak up when it costs them." I shook my head. "You don't know me." "I know enough, and I'll know more if you say yes." I thought of the power imbalance, of how easily this could go wrong. "Why me?" "Because you didn't flatter me," he said simply. "You didn't fear me. You didn't pretend." Silence stretched. I felt small and large at the same time, aware that this moment could change everything or nothing at all. "I need time," I said. "Of course," he replied. "Take it." As I left his office, my phone buzzed, a text from the hospital. Mom's test results were in. My hands shook as I read the words, relief flooding me so fast I had to sit down. She was stable, not cured, but stable. I looked back at the building, at the window where Harold Whitmore stood watching the street below. For the first time, I understood. The $5 tip wasn't about measuring my worth, it was about measuring his own, and whether he liked the answer or not, it had already started rewriting more than just a will.
I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that $5 bill sliding across the table again, saw Harold Whitmore's face when I spoke the truth he hadn't expected. By morning, my thoughts were tangled between hope and suspicion. People with power rarely offered things without strings. I'd learned that early. Still, something about him didn't feel predatory. It felt tired, like a man nearing the end of a long road and realizing he'd missed something important along the way. At the diner, I went through the motions: coffee, orders, smiles. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying his words. Integrity in ordinary places. It sounded noble, almost too noble. Who was I to be the measure of that? I was just a woman trying to keep the lights on and her mother comfortable. That afternoon, Harold returned again. Same booth, same meal. This time, he didn't speak much while he ate. When he finished, he left the check neatly stacked with a folded note instead of cash. I waited until he left before opening it. Inside, in careful handwriting, was an address and a time. No pressure, no demand, just an invitation. I stared at the note for a long time before tucking it into my pocket. The meeting was at a small community center on the east side of town, a place I'd passed 100 times without ever going inside. When I arrived, the parking lot was half full. Through the windows, I could see a handful of people seated in a circle. Ordinary people. A janitor by the look of his uniform, a young woman in scrubs, an older man with grease-stained hands. My heart thudded. Whatever this was, it wasn't about me anymore. Harold stood when he saw me, a faint smile softening his usually reserved expression. "I'm glad you came." "So am I," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. He gestured for me to sit. "Everyone," he said, turning to the group, "this is Clara." They nodded, some smiling, some curious. I felt exposed, like I'd been placed on a stage I hadn't auditioned for. Harold began to speak. He told them about the diner, about the $5 tip, about the response that had unsettled him. He didn't dramatize it, he didn't embellish. He told it plainly, and somehow that made it heavier. "I realized," he said, "that I've spent my life rewarding compliance, not character, and I don't want to leave this world having only measured success in numbers." He explained the foundation then: small grants, emergency assistance, recognition for people who did the right thing when no one was watching. No applications filled with buzzwords, just stories, verified quietly, respectfully. "And Clara," he said, looking at me, "will help guide it." The room went silent. My chest tightened. "I never agreed to that," I said. "He haven't. I'm asking." Every eye was on me. I swallowed. "I don't have experience." "You have discernment," he replied, "and you're not impressed by money." A ripple of soft laughter moved through the room. I felt my face warm. "I need boundaries," I said, "and I won't be anyone's token conscience." "Agreed," he said immediately. I looked around at the others, at the cautious hope in their faces. Something shifted inside me. "I'll try," I said, "but I'm staying at the diner. This doesn't replace my life." Harold smiled, wider this time. "It shouldn't." The weeks that followed were unlike anything I'd known. We met once a week, listening to stories that rarely made headlines: a bus driver who returned a lost envelope of cash, a teenager who worked nights to pay for his siblings' lunches, a cashier who refused to overcharge an elderly man who didn't notice. Each story reminded me how quietly good people lived. Harold listened more than he spoke. When he did, it was with humility that still surprised me. One afternoon, after a meeting, he lingered while the others left. "You're good at this," he said. "I just ask questions," I replied. "That's the point,"
he said. My lawyers ask questions to protect assets. You ask questions to understand people. I didn't know what to say to that. As the foundation took shape, rumors started. Regulars at the diner whispered. Someone had seen me downtown. Someone said I was dating a rich man. Someone else said I'd quit. None of it was true, but truth rarely mattered once a story found legs. One evening, a coworker cornered me by the sink. "So," she smirked, "you get a sugar daddy now?" The words stung more than I expected. "No," I said quietly. "I got an opportunity." She rolled her eyes. "Must be nice." I wanted to explain, to tell her about the stories, about the quiet good, about Harold's tired eyes. Instead, I just nodded and went back to work. Not everyone needed to understand. At home, Mom noticed the change in me. "You're lighter," she said one night, sipping soup slowly. "Tired, but lighter." "I'm doing something that matters," I said. She smiled. "You always have." A month later, Harold asked me to join him for lunch. Not at the diner, somewhere neutral, a small cafe with chipped mugs and mismatched chairs. He insisted on ordering at the counter himself. "You know," he said, carrying his tray carefully, "I used to think generosity was about scale, how much I could give." "And now?" I asked. "Now I think it's about listening, about not assuming silence means consent." I thought about the $5 bill again. "Why a test?" I asked.
The first time I truly understood the weight of what I'd stepped into was the morning Harold collapsed. It was a quiet Wednesday, the kind where the sky hangs low and gray like it's holding its breath. I was halfway through refilling sugar caddies at the diner when my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. Something in my chest tightened before I even answered. "Clara Reynolds?" a man asked, his voice clipped, professional. "Yes?" "This is Dr. Samuel Price from St. Vincent's. Mr. Whitmore asked that you be contacted if anything happened." The world seemed to tilt. "Is he—" "He's stable," the doctor said quickly, "but it was serious, a cardiac event. He's asking to see you." I didn't clock out properly. I didn't explain. I just grabbed my coat and left, my hands shaking so badly I had to sit in my car for a full minute before I could drive. I kept thinking how strange it was that I was the call they made. Not family, not a business partner, me. Harold looked smaller in the hospital bed, the sharp lines of him softened by pale sheets and the quiet beeping of machines. When he saw me, relief flickered across his face. "You came," he said. "Of course," I replied, pulling a chair close. "How are you feeling?" "Like a man who waited too long to listen to his body," he said with a weak smile, "and his conscience." I tried to smile back. "Don't joke." He said, "I'm not." That scare clarified things. He reached for the small table beside his bed and picked up a folder. Thick, organized, legal-looking. My stomach knotted. "Harold," I said carefully, "if this is about—" "I know. You don't want money, and I respect that. This isn't about giving you anything." He opened the folder anyway, revealing documents covered in neat text and signatures. "I changed the structure, my estate. The majority now goes to the foundation, permanently, irrevocably." I swallowed. "Your family is provided for," he said, generously. "But this is different. This is purpose." I studied his face, searching for doubt. "Why tell me now?" "Because if I hadn't met you," he said, his voice roughening, "none of this would exist, and I don't want you blindsided later." The word later echoed ominously. "You're not planning on going anywhere," I said firmly. He smiled faintly. "Not today." The days after his hospitalization were a blur of updates and meetings. Evelyn called me daily, keeping me informed. The foundation board met without Harold for the first time, and the room felt unanchored without his quiet presence. I did my best to keep us focused, to remind everyone why we were there. But outside those walls, the noise grew louder. A local paper ran a short piece about Harold Whitmore's mysterious charitable shift, speculating wildly about influences and motives. My name wasn't mentioned, but I felt exposed anyway. At the diner, customers asked pointed questions. Some congratulated me on moving up. Others looked at me like I'd cheated the system. One man sneered, "Guess honesty pays all right." I wanted to tell him it cost more than it paid. Instead, I refilled his coffee and walked away. At home, Mom worried. "People don't like it when you disrupt expectations," she said gently. "I didn't mean to," I replied. "That's usually how it happens," she said. Harold was released after a week. He moved slower now, his steps more careful, but his eyes were clearer than ever. He asked me to walk with him one afternoon in a small park near his house. The leaves were just beginning to turn, the air sharp with promise. "I'm not afraid to die," he said suddenly. I stopped walking. "Don't talk like that." "I'm not afraid because I finally understand what I'm leaving behind. Not just money, meaning." I felt tears prick my eyes. "You don't owe the world redemption." "No," he agreed, "but I owe it honesty." We sat on a bench watching children play. "Do you regret it?" I asked quietly. "Testing you?" He considered. "I regret that it took a test. I regret that I didn't trust humanity enough to simply ask." I nodded. "People aren't used to being asked." "Neither am I," he said with a small smile. As weeks passed, the foundation awarded its first grants, modest amounts, life-changing to those who received them. I watched a janitor cry when he realized he could fix his car. I watched a nurse breathe easier knowing her student loans wouldn't bury her. Each moment felt sacred, but with impact came backlash. One afternoon, I received an envelope at the diner, no return address. Inside was a letter, the handwriting sharp and angry. It accused me of manipulation, of exploiting an old man, of stealing from rightful heirs. My hands shook as I read it. This wasn't gratitude. This was resentment sharpened into threat. I showed it to Harold that evening. His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't anticipate this falling on you." I knew there'd be noise. I just didn't expect it to feel so personal. He nodded. "We can increase security, limit your exposure." "No," I said firmly. "If this work is going to mean anything, it can't hide." He studied me, then smiled, proud and sad all at once. "You're braver than most people I know." "I'm scared," I admitted. "I just won't let that stop me." That night, I lay awake thinking about courage, about how it isn't loud or fearless, but persistent. I thought about the waitress I'd been, measuring my worth in tips and hours. I thought about the woman I was becoming, standing in rooms where decisions rippled outward. The $5 test had been small, almost petty, but it had cracked something open in Harold and in me, and now there was no going back. The first time I realized how deeply the foundation had unsettled people was when Harold's nephew showed up at the diner. I didn't know who he was at first. He looked like money that wanted to look casual. Tailored jacket, expensive boots scuffed on purpose. He slid into a booth and waited until I noticed him. "Clara," he said, reading my name off the tag like it tasted strange. "We should talk." "I'm working," I replied evenly. "This won't take long," he said, flashing a smile that never reached his eyes. "I'm Daniel Whitmore." The name landed with a quiet thud. Family. The word carried weight I hadn't felt until that moment. "What can I get you?" I asked. "Just coffee," he said, black. I poured it, set it down, and waited. He leaned forward. My uncle's not himself lately. I kept my face neutral. He's recovering from a heart attack. He's making decisions that affect a lot of people, continued. People who've been loyal to him for decades. I heard the accusation tucked inside the words. You should talk to him, I said. Oh, I have, he replied, but he listens to you. That's not true, I said quietly. He smiled thinly. Isn't it? I felt the familiar pressure to shrink, to smooth things over. I didn't. I don't control Harold, I said. I didn't ask for any of this. But you benefit, he said. How? I asked. He hesitated, just a fraction. Enough. Influence, he said finally. Relevance. I laughed then, a short, humorless sound. I go home to a small apartment and worry about my mother's prescriptions. If that's relevance, you're welcome to it. He stared at me, surprised. You really believe you're doing this for the right reasons? I know I am, I replied. He stood abruptly, leaving a bill on the table. Be careful, he said. People don't like it when outsiders rearrange family matters. When he left, my hands were shaking, but my spine felt straight. I cleaned the table slowly, deliberately, grounding myself in the routine. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I sensed with a clarity that frightened me that the real test was only beginning. That night, Harold called. I told him about Daniel without embellishment. He was quiet for a long time. I suspected he might reach out, he said finally. I don't want to be the wedge between you and your family. You're not, he replied. You're the mirror. They just don't like what they see. Still, the encounter rattled me. I wasn't naive enough to think good intentions insulated you from harm. I doubled down on transparency, insisting the Foundation's decisions be documented, reviewed, and shared. Harold supported me, even when it slowed things down. Speed is how mistakes hide, I told him. He smiled. You sound like a board chair. I'm not, I reminded him. No, he said. You're better. As autumn deepened, the Foundation's work reached farther. Stories came in from neighboring towns, teachers, grocery clerks, custodians, people who'd quietly chosen honesty when no one would have blamed them for doing otherwise. Each story felt like a small light. Together, they were a constellation. But light attracts attention. One evening, as I walked to my car after a late meeting, I noticed another vehicle idling nearby. My pulse quickened. When I pulled out, it followed for 2 blocks, then turned away. It might have been nothing. It didn't feel like nothing. I told Harold the next day. His face darkened. This is my fault, he said. It's not, I replied. It's the cost of visibility. I won't have you endangered, he firmly said. I won't have you retreat, I countered. We stared at each other, a quiet standoff. Finally, he sighed. You're stubborn. So am I said. That weekend, I took Mom to the park. She moved slowly now, leaning on my arm. The air was crisp, leaves crunching underfoot. You're carrying something heavy, she said. I chose it, I replied. She squeezed my hand. That doesn't make it lighter. I thought about Daniel's warning, about the letter, about the car. What if I'm wrong? What if this all goes bad? Mom smiled, tired but certain. Then you'll still be right, because you acted with integrity. Outcomes aren't the same as values. Her words settled into me, steadying. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Harold asked me to accompany him to a family meeting. Not to speak, just to be present. I hesitated. They don't want me there. They need to see that you're real, not a rumor. The house was large, quiet, filled with polished surfaces and old photographs.
His family gathered around a long table, faces guarded. Daniel sat opposite me, eyes sharp. Harold spoke calmly, clearly. He explained his choices, his reasons, his health. He emphasized that no one was being abandoned, only that priorities had shifted. "This isn't about Clara," he said firmly. "This is about me, about who I want to be." Daniel interrupted. "Then why is she here?" Harold looked at him steadily. "Because she reminds me to tell the truth." Silence followed, thick, uncomfortable. I kept my hands folded. The announcement of the medical crisis endowment changed everything. Overnight, the foundation went from a quiet local effort to something people talked about on morning radio shows and community boards. The phones rang constantly. Emails flooded in. Stories poured out, raw and urgent. I spent my days balancing shifts at the diner with late nights reading applications, my eyes burning, but my resolve steady. This was what the work asked of me now: attention. Harold watched it all with a mix of pride and concern. "This is bigger than I planned," he admitted one evening as we sat in his study, stacks of folders spread across the desk. "It was always going to be," I replied. "You don't plant a tree and get to decide how wide the shade grows." He smiled at that, then grew serious. "There are people circling," he said. "Advisors, distant relatives, even partners who suddenly remember my name." "I know," I said. "I hear it in the questions they don't ask." He leaned back, tired. "I want to make one more change." My stomach tightened. "Harold?" "Not to the money," he said quickly. "To the message." He slid a document toward me. It wasn't legal language this time. It was personal, a letter he planned to make public alongside the will. In it, he spoke plainly about the diner, about the $5 tip, about what he'd learned too late about power and silence. "You don't have to include me," I said softly. "I do, because it's true, and because it holds me accountable." I read the letter twice. It was vulnerable in a way I hadn't expected. No grandstanding, no absolution, just a man admitting he'd mistaken comfort for goodness. "People will judge you," I warned. "They already do. At least this way they'll judge the right things." The day the letter went out, the response was immediate and polarized. Some praised his honesty, others called it performative. A few headlines were kind, others were cruel. My name appeared in print for the first time, misspelled in one outlet, omitted in another. I felt exposed, my private life suddenly fodder for strangers. At the diner, a man I'd never seen before waited until I refilled his cup. "So you're the conscience," he said, not unkindly. "Must be a lot of pressure." "It's just a job," I replied. He nodded. "Funny, I always thought conscience was free." That night, as I locked up, I noticed the same car parked across the street. My pulse quickened. I stood still, keys clenched between my fingers until it drove away. Maybe coincidence? Maybe not. I told myself fear didn't get to decide my life. Harold's health wavered that winter. Good days and bad. He tired easily, but his mind remained sharp. We talked often, sometimes about the foundation, sometimes about nothing at all. He told me stories from his childhood about growing up poor, about the first deal that made him feel powerful and the quiet compromises that followed. I didn't become cruel. I became convenient. The words stayed with me. As the year turned, the foundation faced its first real crisis, an application surface that seemed too perfect, too polished. When I dug deeper, inconsistencies appeared, a staged story crafted to pull at heartstrings. When I brought it to the board, some hesitated. "We can't investigate everyone this deeply," one member argued. "We can't afford not to," I replied. "Integrity goes both ways." Harold supported me. We declined the application, quietly. 2 weeks later, a journalist called, accusing us of favoritism, of hypocrisy. The story ran anyway, thin on facts, heavy on implication. The backlash was swift. Donations dipped. Emails turned hostile. I questioned myself for the first time in months. Had I overreached? Had I mistaken vigilance for virtue? Mom noticed the strain. "You're carrying the weight of strangers," she said gently. "That's a dangerous habit." "I don't know how to do this halfway," I admitted. "Then learn, or it will break you." I took her words seriously. I delegated more. I stepped back where I could. I reminded myself that being ethical didn't mean being perfect. Slowly, the noise faded. The foundation steadied. In early spring, Harold asked me to come by his house. He looked frailer than I'd ever seen him, wrapped in a sweater, sunlight tracing the lines of his face. "I'm tired," he said simply. My throat tightened. "You're allowed to be." He reached for my hand, his grip warm but weak. "I've finalized everything." I knew what he meant. "You don't have to say it." "He do," he insisted, "because you should hear it from me." He explained the final structure, the safeguards, the trustees, my role, advisory, limited, protected, no personal enrichment, clear boundaries. "You've protected me, now I'm protecting you." Tears blurred my vision. "Thank you." He smiled faintly. "You gave me a gift I didn't know how to buy." The weeks that followed felt suspended, like time had slowed out of respect. Harold rested more. We spoke less. When we did, it was gentle. One afternoon, he asked me a question that surprised me. "Do you ever wish you'd just taken the $5 and walked away?" I considered it honestly. "Sometimes," I said, "life would be quieter." "And better?" I shook my head. "No, just smaller." He closed his eyes, satisfied. Then it was worth it. The call came early one morning. Harold had passed in his sleep. Peacefully, the doctor said. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in my hand, the world strangely silent. I didn't cry right away. I felt still. The service was private, as he'd wanted. Family, a few friends, foundation representatives. I stood near the back, unnoticed by most. Daniel caught my eye once, his expression unreadable. Afterward, he approached me. "I didn't understand. I'm not sure I do now, but I see it." I nodded. "That's enough." When the will was read weeks later, the headlines were loud. But the months after Harold's passing settled into something that felt almost ordinary, and that surprised me more than anything else. I'd expected the world to tilt, to announce the absence of a man who had quietly rearranged its priorities. Instead, the diner still smelled like coffee and grease, the bell still rang, and people still needed refills. Life, I learned, doesn't pause for meaning. It absorbs it and keeps going. The foundation continued without spectacle. That had been Harold's wish. No grand galas, no plaques with his name carved deep. Just work. Quiet, consistent, sometimes frustrating work. I attended meetings once a month now, my role clearly defined. I offered perspective, not permission. The board listened, not because of my proximity to Harold anymore, but because time had proven that I asked the questions others avoided. At the diner, things slowly returned to normal, or what passed for it. The whispers faded, the rumors moved on to someone else. New customers came in unaware of any story attached to my name. I liked that best, being seen only as Clara again. One afternoon, a young woman sat in my section, hands shaking as she held her menu. She couldn't have been more than 20. When I brought her water, she looked up at me with wet eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm just having a bad day." "It happens," I replied gently. "Take your time." When she finished eating, she left a note with a tip. "Thank you for being kind when you didn't have to." I folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Some lessons echo forward. You never know how far. Daniel Whitmore came by once more, months later. This time, he didn't wear the practiced confidence. He looked tired, older. "I wanted to tell you," he said, standing awkwardly near the counter. "I joined the foundation board." I raised an eyebrow. "That's unexpected." "I realized something," he continued. "I was angry because I thought something was taken from me, but nothing was. Something was given to others." "And how do you feel about that now?" I asked. He considered. "Uncomfortable," he said honestly, "but less ashamed." I nodded. "That's a start." After he left, I thought about Harold's family, about how legacies ripple unevenly. Some people are warmed by them, others are burned. You don't get to choose which. Mom's health stabilized that summer. We took slow walks in the evenings, watching the sky change colors. One night, she stopped and looked at me, really looked. "You didn't disappear into that world," she said. "I promised myself I wouldn't," I replied. She smiled. "You stayed soft." The word caught in my chest. Softness had once felt like a liability. Now it felt like a skill. The anniversary of Harold's death came quietly, no ceremonies, just a letter released by the foundation summarizing the year's work. Numbers, stories, impact measured not in millions, but in moments. I read it alone at my kitchen table, his framed letter nearby. I thought about that first day again, the $5 bill, the choice to speak, how small it had felt, how dangerous, how unnecessary, some would say. And yet, people often ask me now, when they hear the story in pieces, if I knew what would happen, if I sensed the weight of that moment. I didn't. I was tired. I was honest. That was it. There's a temptation to turn moments like that into myths, to say courage arrived fully formed. It didn't. It crept in, shaky and unsure, dressed up as irritation and self-respect. I spoke because I was human, not because I was brave. That's the part people miss. The foundation received a letter that fall from a man in another state. He wrote about returning a wallet he could have kept and about how doing so cost him his job when his boss accused him of theft anyway. The foundation helped him bridge the gap until he found work elsewhere. At the bottom of the letter, he wrote, "I didn't know honesty could be this expensive. Thank you for reminding me it's still worth it." I read that line 3 times. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine alternate versions of my life, one where I smiled, pocketed the $5, and went on with my shift, one where Harold never questioned himself, one where the foundation never existed. The world would still be turning, people would still be hungry, some good would still be done somewhere, but not this good, not this way. The truth is, change doesn't always arrive with banners or battles. Sometimes it arrives disguised as rudeness, as discomfort, as a test you never agreed to take. Sometimes it asks you to decide who you are in a moment no one else will remember. I still work the diner. I still live in the same apartment. I still worry about money more than I'd like. But I don't worry about my voice anymore. I know it matters, even when it shakes. On especially long days when my feet ache and patience wears thin, I remember Harold's expression when I refused the tip, the surprise, the relief, the recognition. A man realizing, too late, but not too late, that dignity can't be bought, but it can be honored. That's the inheritance he left me. Not influence, not status, permission. Permission to speak, permission to expect better, permission to believe that small acts done honestly can bend even the heaviest systems towards something like grace. And if that's true for a billionaire and a waitress in a quiet diner, then maybe it's true for anyone, anywhere, deciding in a single moment not to stay silent.
The first time someone called me a hero, I laughed out loud. It was a customer. an older woman with tired eyes and a gentle smile who'd recognized me from a short article clipped to the diner's bulletin board. She said it like it was obvious, like it fit. I shook my head and told her she had the wrong person. Heroes chase danger. I had tripped over honesty on a bad day and kept walking because it felt worse to turn back. That misunderstanding followed me for a long time. People wanted the story to be bigger than it was, cleaner than it had been. They wanted me to say I'd known what I was doing, that I'd sensed destiny leaning over my shoulder. The truth was less dramatic and more uncomfortable. I'd been irritated. I'd been tired. I'd been done pretending that respect was optional just because I wore an apron. And that truth mattered more than any polished version. Life after Harold settled into a steady rhythm. The foundation ran smoothly now, governed by systems instead of personalities. That had been his final quiet triumph, removing himself from the center. My involvement gradually narrowed to occasional reviews and annual check-ins. I liked it that way. Influence without attachment, care without control. At the diner, new routines took shape. I trained a young server named Lila, fresh out of high school, all nervous energy and wide eyes. On her third day, she came to me near tears because a customer had snapped at her over cold toast. "I don't know what I did wrong," she whispered. I handed her a clean cloth and said, "Sometimes people bring their storms with them. Your job isn't to absorb them." She nodded, breathing steadier. Watching her straighten her shoulders, I felt a quiet satisfaction. This, too, was legacy. Unwritten, unfunded, real. On the second anniversary of Harold's death, the foundation published a simple report. No press release, no ceremony, just numbers and stories, the way he'd wanted. I read through it slowly, pausing at the margins where lives had shifted just enough to breathe easier. Rent covered, treatment paid, a second chance bought with nothing more glamorous than follow-through. That night, I took the framed letter off my wall and read it again. His handwriting still felt present, like a voice I could almost hear if I tried hard enough. He'd written about conversations, about learning to listen, about realizing that wealth without humility was just noise. I thought about how many times he could have dismissed me, how easy it would have been for him to feel insulted, to reassert power, how rare it was that he didn't. People ask me now what I learned from Harold. The answer surprises them. I didn't learn generosity from Harold. I learned accountability. I learned what happens when someone finally lets the truth inconvenience them. My mother passed away quietly one winter morning, 3 years after all of this began. She went the way she'd lived, without drama, with grace. At her service, a neighbor stood up and spoke about how Mom had once paid her electric bill without telling anyone, how she'd never made a show of kindness. I smiled through tears. That, too, was familiar. That, too, was integrity. Afterward, as I stood alone in the small hall, I realized something with startling clarity. I'd grown up surrounded by examples of quiet goodness. I just hadn't had a name for it until a billionaire tried to test me with $5. Grief rearranges time. It teaches you what endures. In the months after Mom's passing, I stripped my life down to essentials. Fewer hours, fewer obligations, more intention. I stayed at the diner, not because I lacked options, but because I liked being useful in ways that were immediate and human. One afternoon, a man in an expensive suit sat in Harold's old booth, same posture, same careful movements. When I brought his check, he left a small tip separate from the bill, watching my face closely. I felt a flicker of irritation, then understanding. I didn't give him a speech. I didn't need to. I met his eyes and said, calmly, "If you have a concern, I'm happy to hear it." He blinked, caught off guard. "No," he said quickly. "Everything was fine." I nodded. "Then thank you." He hesitated, then added more to the tip before leaving. I watched him go, feeling neither victorious nor disappointed, just clear. The world doesn't need more tests. It needs more conversations. Over time, the story faded into something people told secondhand, details blurred. The tip became smaller or larger depending on who was talking. The foundation grew mythic. I let it. Stories belong to the people who need them. But here's what I know, and what I want you to know. Integrity isn't a trait you're born with. It's a decision